Hi, friend. Niclas here. Hope you're doing well, and welcome to today's episode. On the show today, we have the CEO of music tech startup SyncFloor and the founder of Brick Lane Records in Seattle, Kirt Debique. And Kirt has a really interesting background, having worked at Microsoft for 20 years as an engineer and manager. And he also holds 37 technology patents. So it's really interesting talking to Kirt, and I really hope you're going to enjoy this conversation as well. And again, before we get into the conversation with Kirt, I'd love you to hit the like button. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done that before, whether that's on Apple Podcast or Spotify or YouTube. And your support really, really matters. We're growing slowly but steadily, and that's all thanks to you. So really appreciate your support. But that's it. Let's get into the interview with Kirt Debique. So please enjoy. I stopped the last maybe couple of months, 6 months, to say that we started. So it's just recording. And
Oh, okay. Oh, there you go. There you
because
go.
I felt like even you're an artist too. So
Yeah.
when you do press record, there's always this bit of a tension
Yeah, of course, of
thing,
course. Yeah, yeah,
and that
yeah.
happens on
And
the
well, and you
podcast
can
too.
and
Yeah,
you can always edit and decide
yeah,
where you
yeah,
want it
yeah,
to
yeah.
start anyway, right? So
Exactly,
it's all good.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that's no problem.
yeah.
But yes, I mean, so yeah, to go back to what we talked about before. So yeah, I moved from London to Leeds a couple of months ago.
hmm
And you're in Seattle, you said. So where in Seattle are you based?
So I don't know if you know. Do you know Seattle well, or have you been here or anything like that?
I know
Where
Amazon is there and Microsoft is there, right?
right.
That's all I
So
know.
well we live fairly close to the University of Washington,
Oh yeah,
in an area called Montlake. And
right.
so that's where, of course, I'm in the basement. My former office is now the nursery. So
Yeah, yeah, cool.
a corner of the basement, hanging out.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But is it always raining in Seattle? Is that just a prejudice?
you know, um, the summers are very, very nice. And actually, I love the weather here. It has an arc to it. Um, and it's changed over the years. But it does. There's a fair amount of rain, especially in the winter, spring kind of season. But like
Hmm,
today's quite nice
nice.
from what I could see.
Have you ever seen the show The Killing? I think it's called The Killing. It's based in
No,
Seattle.
no, I
Uh,
haven't actually.
it's really, really
No.
good. It's like a
Yeah.
thriller.
Oh.
It
Okay.
is a
Yeah. Yeah.
thriller,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
take place in Seattle. But yeah, it's always
Yeah.
raining. To
Yeah.
create this
I
atmosphere.
think they're just trying to trick everybody. Be like, don't come here. It's
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
fine. It just rains.
Yeah, yeah. But then you have like beautiful fisheries up there, right?
Yeah, no, I mean just in general, the terrain is beautiful, right? You get mountains and green and water, all sort of in this close proximity to the city, and yeah, and so it's a quite beautiful place for sure.
Nice. Yeah, I'd love to go
Yeah,
actually. Uh,
yeah, yeah, come on out.
yeah, yeah, definitely. But so also actually before we started the conversation, I was listening to your, I don't know when it came out, but Things Left Unsaid.
Oh wow, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
When did I release
A couple
that?
of years
Not
ago,
20. It might have been a little bit longer actually. It could have
2016.
been, yeah, 2015, 20. I think
Yeah,
it might
yeah,
have been around 2015. Yeah,
yeah.
it was when I released that record. Yeah, it was a good record to make. I feel for me it was I was really focused on making a piece of art and delving really deeply into sort of my history and psyche and things like that. And so, I think sometimes some of the best stuff can come out when you really focus on telling the story and not necessarily about like or worrying about how it's going to be received, but more focus on sort of being true to the story that you need to tell.
Mm.
And for me that was, I really was trying to almost do like a mini book, like each song was kind of a chapter in a story. Um, and in fact, even the album itself is constructed, there's sort of photography and imagery and things like that. That's all sort of each song has like a whole world associated with it.
Mm,
And so yeah, so that was yeah, it was I enjoyed making that.
definitely. But so was that because obviously you talked about this a lot before, but yeah, you worked
Hmm.
at Microsoft obviously for
Hmm.
20 odd years.
Yeah, yeah. Hmm.
So was that your first album, or yeah, first
No,
album
no,
coming
actually,
out of?
actually,
Right.
no, I no, I had so my first record was a band called Dead to Rights, and that was sort of well before that. Then I had a band called Mayors of Liberty. That was a fairly large band. It started off as sort of an acoustic three piece, but became sort of a full sound, 8-piece band kind of thing, kind of crazy stuff. And then Things Left Unsaid was sort of my first sort of solo record, really coming out and doing something that was my sound.
Mm,
Um, and so yeah, so that was also a big transition then. Yeah.
right. But
Uh,
so, how was it transitioning from being in a fairly? I mean, obviously it's a cool job, I guess, working at
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Microsoft.
yeah,
But how was that transition like working at that company to then being, I guess, self-employed, whatever you want to call it, your
yeah.
own businessman?
Sure,
How was that
sure.
transition of that uh, transition?
Yeah, yeah, no. So when I left, I'd come to a really great closure point on some large projects and things like that, and it was the right time to think about what the next big thing was. And it so happened that in parallel, I was sort of working on making music. I had connected with a lot of folks in the Seattle music and art scene, and had made sort of some deep friendships that really I had been thinking, how do I help this community in a deeper way? And at the same time, this was around 2011, 2012. I was witnessing, the yet another major disruption in the music industry, and out of which, I think streaming was really the big thing that kind of rose from the ashes of that particular disruption. Broad-based consumer streaming, Spotify, and things like that. Um, and I kind of felt that there's got to be a way that I can help the independent sector, right? And that being artists or micro labels or small labels and on and on and on. Sort of find a path through this. And that's not to say that at the time I knew anything at all, but I wanted to help. I had a big desire to help, and so I decided to leave and start a music label. Which I think at the looking back at the time was probably about the craziest thing I could go do,
Right.
kind of thing. But I felt that the principles I could sort of go after or espouse for the label could really try to be an exemplar for change in terms of how artists were signed and the interaction really among
Mm,
artists on a label. So I wanted it to feel a lot more like a collective. I wanted to have artists feel that this was an investment, not a loan. And so we had principles around, sort of you see revenue and there's, before any recoup type thing, there's no recoup and such as such. Um, the artist majority splits and no lock-in for multiple records or years. You do a project with us, and if you wanted to do another project with us, that'd be great.
mm,
And tried to really build something that felt like a family in a way. Um, and I loved doing that. That was in Bricklane Records, and it still exists today. But it's that time was really a wonderful time because I felt like we achieved that thing, that feeling, right, of changing the way artists, sort of feel like they were being treated. In fact, the last artist that we signed, an indie folk band called Valley Maker that's doing really well now. Austin makes beautiful music. I remember when we were working, negotiating with his team, his management and legal team, they literally asked us if we were a nonprofit because they were like, your terms are really friendly. You know?
Right.
We're like, no, no, that's we just think that's how it should work, kind of thing. And that's today, where artists are very savvy, and things have changed, and the independent sector is the fastest growing sector. Independence is a business choice, right? It's not and
Mm-hmm.
it's never been about like, oh, this is quality or this is not quality. In fact, that's
Right.
in some sense, that's a misconception that many people have in the mainstream, right? Is they think, major label, known, mainstream good, indie, DIY, unknown, bad, right, kind of thing. And
Mm-hmm.
really, there's this beautiful, as with anything, arc of, of different types of music and different aesthetics and different approaches. And in the indie sector, you have beautiful art that people truly, deeply connect to.
Mm.
And we tell people all the time, that nowadays that 35-40% of the economic activity in the music industry is in the independent sector. 52% of the Grammys were won by independents this year.
Right. Definitely.
um the in our we tell people in our index, right? So we have different tiers of access to music for licensing, and our most frictionless tier is fitness. We do micro
Mm.
licensing around that. And on that tier, the top 50 artists have an average of over 500,000 monthly listeners and
Oh.
represent well over 2.5 billion streams on Spotify. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, so independence again is a business choice. It's not, it's a highly relevant, high quality commercial music coming out of the
Mm.
independent sector. You can find it. It's
Definitely.
easy to find, actually. And so that's,
Yeah.
that's something that I feel really happy to have been, back then part of just trying to help that community.
Mm. I mean, something I don't really understand, and I'm not talking about Brick Lane Records now or SyncFloor, but as a if you're in a band or you're an artist and
Mm-hmm.
you have the fan base, or a big enough fan base where a major, let's say, would
Mm-hmm.
want to sign you, I
Mm-hmm.
don't really see any bit benefits of actually signing to that major label. I mean, it's just a big bank loan, which with awful terms,
Well, I
right?
mean,
I mean,
some of that is clearly changing now because like I say,
right.
artists are much more savvy. So
Mm,
they really kind of say, look, I can be in the driver's seat here if I have worked to build a deep engagement with my fans, and you're coming to me saying that you want to work with me to take that to some other level. I'm going to make really clear what terms are important to me, right? And so I think in the end, that business choice, somebody could decide that business choice does make sense to work with a major, right? It might make sense in terms of the access to marketing or expertise or other producers or the right style of management or whatever. But it's a personal thing, and I think what's important is that artists really dig deep into what they're trying to get out of the relationship and what those terms are and what's the right trade-off for them.
mm,
And that's, everybody's got a little bit of a different trade-off, right? Kind of thing
mm,
that they'll want to make in terms of where they want to spend their time building the
mm,
business and the brand, whether they want more stuff up front for a certain kind of freedom to do certain things, or if they're able to kind of have that happen over time and therefore get perhaps better terms
right.
on the dollars that come in, and or better splits or what have you. And so it's it's really something that is a personal choice.
Mm,
um I think there are many fantastic independent options, right? if you
right.
if
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
if
yeah.
you're looking to be signed, so that choice, right? And that goes not even just sort of traditional labels and publishers and so on, but also sort of the one of the other very growing sectors is in the idea of music services, right? And where you find people saying, hey, I want to give you the services that allow you to be your own label, right? Sort of people doing things like the label in your pocket type stuff that I think United Masters talks about, or the types of things that Amuse does, or the types of things that you could get if you go talk to somebody like a TuneCore or DistroKid, or
Mm,
you can kind of use different sort of services to kind of build
right.
your brand and what you're trying to do as a business, you as a business. And
Mm,
again, it's your choice as to where you want to spend the time and what makes sense for you and things like that.
right. But so a couple of questions came to mind. So running SyncFloor,
Mhm.
is that the that so saying SyncFloor it also means Brick Lane Records, or is it two separate stuff?
They're two
The
entities,
same.
and my my
Right.
focus has been on SyncFloor.
Right.
Sort of, but it's sort of it's there's an arc to the story as such, right? Sort of running an independent label give me a lot of empathy and insight into the independent sector and the value that's there and the needs that are there in terms of access to opportunity and the flexibility and thirst for taking on and experimenting with new rights and economic frameworks. And frankly, the vein of gold that particularly runs through the independent sector, where you can have consolidated rights around music, because that's a huge enabler for then taking that and trying to do different things that are frictionless licensing and stuff like that.
Right. Interesting. But so right. So having SyncFloor and Brick Lane Records, if an artist comes to you and want to pitch their music, like first of all, what makes you first open the email to actually listening to their pitch reel or demo reel, whatever you want to call it, portfolio? What for you makes that happen? And then obviously sign them, or maybe not sign them because the music is bad, but at least opening the email and
Right.
listening to the music. What
Well,
makes you do that?
well, I'll speak about it in the context of SyncFloor, because that's where kind of most of our attention and activity is right now. Um, uh, on SyncFloor, one of the things that we say is that we typically deal with independent labels and publishers and distributors and things like that. And it can be very small, micro labels and so on, with just a few artists and a small catalog, all the way up to larger distributors like, Symphonic Distributions, Bodega, or TuneCore, or Create Music Group, and so on, who are all partners with SyncFloor. And the thing there is that what's been important is that it's a good unit of curation for us, because we're certainly very curatorial about what shows up in the index, and it also is a good thing for licensees, because they tend to want to have a business on the other end of the license, right, representing and warranting the things associated with the license. We do sometimes have independent artists in there, like a good example is an artist called Approaching Nirvana. But the in that case, he's closing in on like 500,000 monthly listeners, and it's kind of built enough of a brand that he really runs his stuff as both an artist and a business, and so it sort of makes sense there. In terms of sort of emerging independent artists, one of the things we wanted to do was to create a sort of synergistic ecosystem, right? And so there, what we do is that you can actually go to our site. There's a button that says "Become a Catalog Partner," but if you click that, at the very bottom, there's a thing that said, "Hey, are you an unsigned independent artist or band?" And we want to hear from you, because what's nice is that we have now over 80 and growing catalog partners of all kinds of sizes, so labels, publishers, etc. So when you submit your music there, our analysts listen to it, try to determine if it's at the right, quality, production value, etc. And if they think that there's a match in some subset of our partner ecosystem, they'll put it in front of them. So you kind of have this sort of sync focused A&R kind of
Mm.
loop that can happen there, right? And so in that case, we listen to all the stuff that comes through, and sort of say, hey, is there a good match?
Right.
And we feel that that's really important as a service to provide to the independent sector.
So you actually listen to all the submissions,
Yeah, our
or
analyst team does. They'll listen to all the
right?
submissions and decide, hey, does this make sense? Is there some subset of our, 80 and growing, partners and labels and publishers and so on that might find this interesting? And if we think they do, we'll put it in front of them, and if they do, we'll connect the parties and say, hey,
Mm.
party on,
But
see what
are
happens.
there yeah? But are there any like benchmark that those analysts are going after, or is it all personal taste, like
Well,
quality of music?
so one of the things, the reason that we kind of have it in our analyst team is because you know they already have to, so in general they are, artists and composers and things like that. So that's one thing. But they have to, in some sense, put aside their own personal taste and say, given a particular genre, right? Because not everybody's into every genre. But if you're listening to a genre, you have to kind of step back and say, is this high production value, and is this sort of an exemplar in the genre? Is this artistic in a way that's interesting for the genre and so on? And they already have to do that because we have to one curate content um, into our index. So we kind of decide like, is this a good partner to work with because they have good content that we want to have show up for our licensees, and as they listen through stuff. So our ingestion process combines both algorithmic analysis and human input. And
Right.
so they already also think in terms of like, okay, well, what does this stuff really mean across a number of different characteristics as part of that augmentation that happens from the algorithmic stuff, and then bringing in the human side, and so they have a lot of experience in kind of taking that broad perspective, and so they're a great team to also evaluate whether or not somebody's submission should get in front of us, a set of the partners that we have, and then from there
Right.
it's up to the partners whatever criteria they want to use to determine if they want to make a connection.
Hmm. Interesting. And is there like particular, so, or maybe not actually. I mean, it sounds like there's no particular genre you
No,
only
we have
work
a
with.
very
No.
very diverse
Yeah, yeah,
catalog, and I
yeah.
mean even just from where we source content in terms of our label partners, the US, the UK, Europe, Nigeria, the Philippines, on and on, like a fairly extensive
Right.
set of places that we love to see music from, and
Right.
lots and lots and lots of different type of music. I certainly welcome people to go explore on SyncFloor,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
you'll
yeah.
you'll find all sorts of stuff.
Awesome. And do you, because I talked to another person who runs a label too, like Sync Label,
Mhm.
uh, and we're talking about like perpetual licenses. Is that what you guys offer too? Or
It
is it,
depends. It depends on the tier. Like so
right?
if you go to SyncFloor, you can get sort of traditionally negotiated tiers of licensing. So whether that's for commercial social video or broadcast TV, or and it could be advertising or film or TV, etc. Um, all the way down to in fitness we do micro licensing. So there's a particular tier and it has a particular set of restrictions and a particular way of using it. We support podcast licensing. We support licensing for videos for nonprofits. We support, personal and small business licensing for video. We support, and so depending on the tier, you're either negotiating specific terms, including term, how long, or we have some defaults that make sense. Like for instance, in the fitness, micro license,
Hmm.
there's a default for the Microsync that happens for a fitness class.
What's a Microsync? I never heard that
So
before.
so the way we think about it is that it really it's a way of identifying a certain sort of price point and a certain frictionless type of licensing, so real time licensing. The way to think about it is this: is that if you're a fitness company and you're trying to pull together music for a class, one, the economics are very different because the cost to make the production for the class, right, is relatively low, and your density of music usage is very high, right?
Hmm.
So you kind of need a different economic framework to make that work. In addition, what you have is um, a set of restrictions that you can place on the way that content is used, right? It's going to be used in the context of fitness, accessible to that fitness company's subscribers, so it's not going to show up somewhere else. It won't have advertising in it, et cetera, et cetera. So you kind of have a set of restrictions that also allow you to say, okay, well, the economic framework around that, the price points, et cetera, can be different from, let's say, another type of sync. And once you get there, what you're trying to do is you're trying to create a framework where the licensor and the licensee can agree to those terms and restrictions and price points, et cetera, up front, so that the licensing itself is very, very like it's basically putting a row in a database. There isn't a workflow and a signature and a call and a whatever around it, right? It just happens. And so then it can become truly part of the production workflow for a fitness company. And so that's what we have. And so we actually end up, billing on a monthly basis for all the licensed activity that happens by the instructors for the fitness company because we have this framework in place.
Cool.
And we find, our customers find that like really incredible.
Nice. That's pretty cool.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
so in the end, like library music, sync music, whatever you want to call it, is it ultimately a numbers game? And if so, how do you win that game?
Well, you mentioned library music, and we see ourselves in a very different. sort of tier
Right.
from production music, right? So in fact, what we hear from customers, like for instance in fitness, is that the issue they have is that production music doesn't have the same kind of artistic quality and brand equity that they're looking for, that their instructors are looking for, especially as they want to connect to their customers, to the subscribers. They want, people want to hear music from real artists that have real arc and is, high production value, and on and on and on. And so what they're finding is that when they look at the options available in production music, they naturally want to gravitate to commercial music, right? To stuff that's out there. In colloquially, people say it's like the stuff that you imagine you'd hear on the radio, right? Even if it's music from artists that they don't know yet, right? They know it when they hear it, that this is, sort of real music, right? And that's really important. And that's when we talk about sort of the quality of the artists that we have, right? That example I gave you, the top 50 artists having, 500,000 monthly listeners and 2.5 billion streams on Spotify, etc. Right?
Mm.
That's really important to get access to a corpus of that music. And so we feel like there's a big divide there. Now, once you get into there, in terms of, if you're participating in our ecosystem, right? We always tell people, like, you still have to, you do you, right? Because that's the thing that people appreciate, right? Is you making beautiful stuff with the aesthetic that really comes from you.
Mm.
And what our job is to take all that diversity and all that beautiful diversity and give it access to opportunity by putting it into the hands of all the people who are just doing searches, right? If you think about, I like to use the fitness trainer example because we're spending a lot of time with fitness companies these days. Fitness trainers are essentially themselves brands. They're people with tastes, and they want to communicate a certain feel, not just a feel that matches the particular type of energy of the class that they're doing, but also represents them as a person
Mm.
communicating a feeling to other people, right, who are experiencing their class. And that's going to have a lot of great diversity in and of itself, right? And so, do you, and let us do the job of getting it in front of as many people as possible.
Right. So so what's the difference then between library music and production music? I'm not sure I really understand that.
I mean, my assumption when you said it was that you were talking about production music. When you say library music, it's a sort of, it's, all of a kind as such, and I
Right.
distinguish that from commercial music.
Right. But so what do you mean when you say production music then? What is that to you?
Oh, so production music generally. So if you think about the evolution, right? Production music started out as sort of the evolution of jingles in some sense, right? Sort
Right,
of
right, right, right.
making it specifically for background use in film and TV and stuff like
Right.
that. And it's
Right, right.
certainly evolved since then, right? But sort of its purpose and method of production, how it's made, and what goes into that is very different from the music that's made for commercial music purposes, right?
Right.
And what we're finding is that what people end up gravitating to in all these new verticals, these modern digital experiences that want music at their core so that they get high emotional engagement, is they want real commercial music by real
Right.
artists,
Right,
right?
right, right.
And that's sort of what we've been able to do, is to aggregate a large corpus of that music with consolidated rights and the ability to do real-time frictionless licensing in a number of different tiers, and layer on that a unique patented discovery system, so that people can easily and have a fun time actually looking for and finding the music they need, and then acquiring the rights to it for their use in as a creator or as a business.
Hmm. That's cool. But so
Thanks.
like company so yeah, are you familiar with like Amper Music and
Yeah, yeah, I'm
I don't know
familiar
if
with
they're on
that.
the same PR firm as you guys or
Yeah, that's
whatever it
right. Yeah,
is.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. I
But
believe so.
so are those sort of companies a threat to you guys? Like in terms of being able to, because I guess a fitness instructor could go to Amper and say, "Hey AI, make me a 30-minute
Sure,
workout song."
sure.
Yeah.
We don't think about it as competitive in that sense, because I think the choice to use that tool is one that, if that's what you're going to do, then we're just not the choice for you in some sense, right? And similarly, if what you're looking for, and we think, the vast majority of the folks that we talk to that's what they're looking for. Is they're like, look, I want to discover new artists, new bands, new. I
Right.
want to find my new favorite band, right?
Mm.
As I communicate to people through my production, right? A feel that matches the thing that we're trying to accomplish from a fitness perspective, or a podcaster. If you're a podcaster and you're like, hey, I want something that's going to be the theme for my podcast. They're looking
Mm.
for something they feel was made with, like, was crafted with love and care by a real artist, that they feel that lifts their narrative, right?
Mm.
When they find that thing, there's a sort of a magic moment when two pieces of art, two pieces of production meet, right?
Mm.
And that's what they're looking for. And so we find that that's what people look for. That's not to say that those types of things don't have their place. But that's your personal choice. You know.
Right. And but like let's say a writer, a person who makes production music for a living. Uh, and going back to my previous question, do you think that person, like for that person to be able to make production music for a living, is that a numbers game? You think? Like, because I heard someone
I,
say like, you need to flood the market.
I
I
see.
said,
It's hard for me to answer that, since that we don't deal in production music. So
right, right.
in that part of the ecosystem, I don't have sort of the data to say, like, what's the approach as a writer in that context. Um,
Mm,
we focus on commercial music, and there, like I said, like, we tell people, do you make the business choice that makes the best sense for you? And if you're in that independent sector, we're really happy to try to help send opportunity your way.
mm. Oh, yeah, makes sense. But so, like talking about AI, is that something? I know it says a different choice. You guys don't necessarily work in the same space per se. Like different, different requirements, taste, whatever. But
Mm-hmm.
do you see that? Do you see that entering your space too, in terms of what people are looking for? 'Cause let's say you present them with an AI song versus a written song by a human. Do you think for the usage, like say a podcast, do you think it matters in the end, like where it comes from?
I mean, ultimately, as the person making a creative work, right? I think all of it matters, right? It matters, where it comes from, what it is, how you feel about it, how it projects and enhances the feeling you're trying to create, and so on. Um, that's not to pass any judgment per se on what your choice ultimately ends up being, but I think it always matters, right? Because you're making a piece of art yourself, as somebody who's
Mm.
telling a story, or something like that, right? So I certainly encourage people, um when they're making something like that. Let's say you're making a podcast, to really think through that whole, sort of process, right? Step back and think about the theme and the podcast that you're trying to create, and what that means, and what feelings you're trying to evoke, because it's all about that, right? As storytellers, you're trying to evoke a feeling, right?
Mm.
Even when you're having an interview, right, you're talking about a set of topics because you want people to engage in a certain way and to leave feeling a certain way, whether that's, they feel wiser, or feel empowered, or whatever it is, right? And music is this really magical thing to help, amplify and enhance whatever feeling you're trying to convey. And so, you have to think deeply about the music you want to associate with the thing you're making.
Mm.
And so, what it is and how it's made and where it comes from, all those things matter.
Mm. Yeah, to agree. It
Yeah.
does definitely.
Yeah.
But something I did see on your website, SyncFloor, uh, is the ability, like for someone to come and search, and then you
Mhm.
use like what's it called, neural, what's it called?
Oh, natural language music search.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, in my head, I was like, oh, that's because he come from Microsoft.
No,
Is
no.
that, does that have
Well, so
relevance or?
yeah, so the story of that is that, so natural language music search is that you can say in the context of music, you can say a set of creative and natural expressions, including sentiment and references to artists and things like that, into our search engine, and it interprets that in real time and brings you back relevant results with a ton of transparency about why it matched those results, so that you can then apply additional context as you go through the process of auditioning and discovering the thing that you want.
Yeah.
And so that's like the discovery engine we built a lot of the stuff around, and we see that people really enjoy interacting with our interface because it has these features.
Mm.
And in fact, we received a patent for natural language music search in November
Oh,
last
cool.
year, which was really exciting. The way it came about is that when we were first talking about building SyncFloor, we were trying to see what so we had this idea of aggregating lots of interesting independent sector content and providing a way for people to sort of self-serve and engage in searching for it, given some set of criteria. And when we looked at, like, and in that sense, discovery, and search is the front door to any system like that, right? And so when we were thinking about, well, what is that front door for us, and how do we differentiate from what's out there, we started looking at, well, what happens when people interact around this stuff, right? And if you look, as a label, we of course saw a lot of those things, the briefs that people send around looking, saying, yeah, I'm looking for something that's, thoughtful indie folk like Sufjan Stevens with strings, and for a scene that does blah 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 blah, right? It could be doing that, right?
Mm.
And the more we saw those things, the more we started to think, well, what if you could just put that directly into the search engine? Could that work? Right. And really, it was, it took a couple of years working on
Yeah, yeah, I
on
can
on
imagine.
that deep technology in order to get to a point
Mm.
where we were like, yeah, this can work well.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's something we're really proud of, is getting
Yeah,
that
it's cool.
part of it.
I
Thank you.
mean, because like also because the people, I mean, not all the time, I guess, but most of the people who do pick the music for whatever
Mhm.
application, they're not musicians, right? So they
Well,
might search
they're
for,
coming from a different creative space, you know what I mean? And
yeah.
so they want to be able to express things at a level of creativity, and including the one of the magical things we do is that we allow you to not just say the sentiment that you want. So, one of the examples we use is, you can say, I want to I want something that gives me that shake your body at a delightful dance hall party, kind of
Mm-hmm.
feel. But you also want to be able to say something like Rihanna's work,
Right.
right? and
Mm.
and and that, people tend to think in both those terms, like a sentiment and a feeling and a vibe they
Mm.
want to communicate, and something that feels like that, right, that they know, right? So whether that's an artist or a song or what have you, and so being able to say all those things in one place and have us interpret it all, right, is really magical.
Yeah, I think it's pretty cool actually, and yeah,
Thank
definitely
you.
helps searching, uh, which is really cool. Um, but something like just changing topics completely, like going back to the Microsoft days.
Sure, sure.
And because I was talking to my partner earlier this week, I believe it was, and
Hmm.
we said like, oh, I bet working at Microsoft, let's say versus, and please correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, yeah, no, go ahead. Yeah, yeah.
Well, we were talking about working at Microsoft seems really corporate compared to Google, Apple. Seems really
Mm,
gray. Is that
mm,
the case
mm.
or not? I mean, what is the vibe working at Microsoft?
I mean, I'd emphatically say no. I think especially, nowadays, sort of, you can go find, the passion and intensity and diversity of thought and approach at all of the sort of big tech companies, because they're all doing so many different types of things, and both small and large things, and experimental things and mainstream things, and so on and so forth. And so Microsoft is no different in that sense. Um, back when I was there, I started there, in '92, and I mean, at that time, it felt like you're almost at a co-op of startups. There was so much going on in so many different spheres, and you could, work on, I worked on, operating systems and distributed systems and multimedia and cryptography and
Right.
real-time communications and mobile productivity. Like I did so many different types of things there and learned so much. And that was it was really exciting. And yeah, I don't think it's any
Right,
different from
different.
any of the others.
Right. There was something I was wondering, a bit random, but yeah.
No,
I
that's
mean,
all right.
but so how do you think having worked at Microsoft, for example, has helped you starting your own business like SyncFloor? I mean, was it a big, maybe not shock, but big learning curve? Obviously, you had maybe a big learning curve starting at Microsoft, but was it also a big learning curve now starting your own business? Like, and what was
Yeah.
that experience like? Like, was it a struggle or was it just
Yeah, I mean,
was it go?
startups are their own beast. You know what I mean? Like it's so, and that are very different from working at a company, even a large growing dynamic company like Microsoft was. Um, uh, the I can tell you even today I'm still learning a ton. Sort of
Mm-hmm.
running a startup and going on the arc that we are. Um, it was certainly incredibly helpful to have had the depth of experience and technical expertise that I built while working there, in terms of then going and trying to solve some very hard big problems in the space that we're trying to solve now. Um, uh, I think one of the things I gained as well from working at Microsoft, both from a sort of not just as being a technologist and someone who could implement and design big systems, and but also participate, because in my time there I ran large engineering teams, and I worked as a technology advisor to one of the presidents there and so on. And so being able to think in terms of how the business intersects with technical strategy was really important. And it's important when you're trying to actually chart a course for yourself. Um, and then I'd say finally that I tried and did so many different types of things at Microsoft that it removes some of the fear factor of going into an unknown space. You just kind of say, all right, well, I'm going to go figure it out. Right? That's part of the culture there, and part of the culture at many of the sort of big known tech companies. Right? Is I don't know. Here's some big unknown space. Go figure it out. Right?
Yeah.
And you got to do a lot of that in a startup.
But
So.
how do you approach that aspect of just not knowing and figure it out? What is that? How do you decode that to be able to break it down to various small tasks so it becomes
Yeah. Uh,
easier to
you know,
solve?
I mean, I certainly leverage a lot of what I call my software architecture experience. Where part of it is taking a large problem and trying to map the space first of all, starting with a lot of curiosity and a willingness to be patient about understanding the space and gaining the empathy you need to have with customers or partners, etc., so that you really in your bones deeply get what it is you're trying to solve. Because I think it isn't talked about enough, is that empathy is the thing that allows you to build great solutions, is when you
Right.
can really truly feel like the customer or the partner, and understand like how you want to design a system to appropriately meet their both expressed and unexpressed needs. So for me, one of the great things about SyncFloor is that I have all this deep experience on the technology side and the technology business side from Microsoft, and then I spent years on the label side, so I really got to understand the music business and the independent sector and things like that. So that in putting those things together, I was coming from a really deep position of knowledge and empathy, to go do the rest. And that's not to say you don't still have to learn a lot of stuff, but that's an incredibly helpful foundation to start from.
Right. But so when you talk about empathy in that context, so let's say there's a problem. I mean,
Mhm,
doesn't matter if it's the label or Microsoft days, but
mhm.
what are the questions you then ask yourself to gain more empathy or find out the correct empathy thing to look into? Or you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I think everything's a little bit different, but I think for me, there's there's a part really trying to dig deep to understand, what don't I know, what don't I understand, who do I need to talk to get a better sense of this, what are the things I need to do myself, roll up your sleeves and do. Like, there's something I talk to our team about all the time, right, is that, before I go write some code to solve a problem, I love like actually solving the problem sort of, quote unquote manually, right?
Mm.
Trying to understand like, okay, and sometimes actually to the point where it becomes a little painful to have to do it manually, but I almost want to get to that point where I'm like, okay, this is a little painful, but now I've done it enough times that I really, really know all the edges, right? All the different cases that I have to think about. And then when you build the thing to help automate that or serve a particular need, you're really coming from this point of deep understanding and empathy again. And so I think it's about really getting into that mindset of asking questions, and sort of being patient and trying to map out a space and get to the edges,
Mm.
because a lot of the pain happens when you solve the thing but for sort of this, mainstream 80% case, but things fall off the edges really quickly. Right.
Right.
So as much as you can understand, sort of the full space, the much smoother the experience that you're going to build is.
Right. But so, because one of my many struggles is being able to have the guts to ask embarrassing questions. Like you maybe you think, oh, this is so stupid. They're gonna think I'm stupid, basically. How do you deal with that? Then, if you ever felt like that.
Well, I think, part of the human experience is everyone probably in some sphere feels like that, right? But I think you just have to really, in some ways, push through it, because and I think I've in at least in the space of building technology and building solutions, um, you know, I I have enough experience now that I know that the issue isn't that I can't figure things out or that I have something lacking. The issue is that I don't understand a space well enough, and that's the most important thing to go do. And so, whatever questions you need to ask, that's important, right? And really, people respond well when you say, "Help me understand something." Right, like,
Right.
they don't look at you as weird or bad or dumb or whatever it is, right? They're just like, oh, if they feel like this genuine desire to understand, they want to help
Mm.
you get there, right?
Yeah.
And that's what helps you build better solutions.
Mm. Yeah, that's good to remember, actually. Yeah, because it's interesting because my journey now has changed. I mean, it's almost like opposite to yours, where I used to work in music and
Mhm,
pandemic hit, and
mhm,
we moved to Leeds, and I said, okay, I don't want to work in live gigs anymore, doing live
mhm,
sound,
mhm.
and all the artists I was working with, it just came to a halt.
Right, right, right.
But then I got into coding and iOS
Cool.
development, whatnot.
Nice.
So now I got a job in that,
Oh,
starting.
congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank you. So yeah, it's a completely new space, and I found myself, it's like, oh, I don't know much at all.
And that's okay. That's,
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
none of us are born knowing anything, knowing everything. We
Yeah,
are
yeah,
all born
yeah.
knowing nothing in some sense, right? So it's all about, if you love something, if you really are into it, like, for me, those things have been, music and technology. But if you really love it, then the process of learning more about it and sort of mapping the space, and it's just fun. It's great. And so you want to ask the questions, you want to experiment with things. I actually find that that's a really, really important part, especially with coding, is, picking little projects and just doing them, just for doing its sake. It's kind of like making music for its own sake, making art for its own sake.
Mm,
You just do the stuff just because you can't help but but mess about, right? And that's the thing that starts to fill your store of knowledge and experience, right?
mm.
And that makes the journey fun.
Yeah, definitely. But Kurt, before we wrap up, it's been really fun talking to you.
Oh,
Uh,
thank you. It's
uh,
been fun being here.
awesome. Do you have like a favorite failure that set you up for like later success? Could
Well,
be.
we're doing it all the time.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
In a startup, right here. You're constantly on that journey of trying things and going, oh, that didn't really work out as well as I'd imagined or hoped. But that's okay, because I think, like, I you know you I have such a different perspective now on quote unquote failure. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
just all learning, right? And it's all about expectations, right? Going into something, knowing that, what, this may not work out the way I think it will work out, but I will try to get the most out of the experience anyway, right? Even in the success case, sometimes it's successful in a way that you weren't expecting it to be successful. You know what I mean? And so, I think it's really about taking a different perspective on that stuff. And somewhere I read, one of the things to learn about being surprised, um, isn't that you have to somehow figure out how to not be surprised, but it's that the world is surprising, right? And
Yeah.
so and that it's going to happen again, and you just have to figure out what your process, your both mental and emotional processes um for learning and getting the most out of it.
Mm. Yeah. Well said.
Thank you. Thank you.
But yeah, I mean, Kirt, thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for
Real
having me here.
pleasure. Real pleasure. Thank you, Kirt, for coming on to the show. It was great talking to you, and hope you, the watcher or listener, enjoyed it as well. Again, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, whether that's on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. And also, actually, before you leave, if you want exclusive access to interviews before the public, please check out the Audio Tribe email list. There's a link to that in the description below. It's free, of course. Just enter your name and email address, and you have joined the Audio Tribe email list. Um, Again, awesome to have you here this week again. Feel free to leave a comment below. Let me know what you think. But that's it. Awesome to have you here, and I will see you next week again. So take care.